look at what he's done. The black king has crept into the position. He's going for the win, Magnus, if he can get his king into the f3 square.
Hikaru will be absolutely raging after this game. So it's Norway Chess, this is blitz chess, to decide who gets the most white pieces when the main event kicks off tomorrow. Now this is his game against Magnus Carlsen with black, and the first thing to note here, Magnus opens with the disrespect gambit. Look at his clock time. 2 minutes 37 seconds on the clock. So he turns up late, already down on time. I mean, this game, so many twists and turns. Wait till you see the look on the players' faces at the end of this one. So we get bishop g5, the Torre attack. But after knight e4, bishop f4, it starts to resemble something like a London. So we get these standard opening moves, nothing too much to say. The bishop comes to f5. You can play with other systems where you keep that one home, but Magnus goes for this one. And now Hikaru pressures the b pawn, and no queen b6, queen staying on the board, queen d7. So now bishop b5 pins that knight on c6 and looks to land a monster one on e5. So we get knight takes on d2, played by Magnus, and here Hikaru goes full bomb cloud and takes with the king. Why is he doing that? Well, he wants to win. He's imbalancing the position already. So this is really interesting now how he continues the attack. So we get f6 from Magnus, looking to set up the big centre. Queen a4 intensifies the pressure there. Rook c8 adds some defence. And now Hikaru takes on c5. A really risky looking move visually, because Magnus gets this huge centre. You know, you just ceded some control here. The bishop drops, he recaptures the pawn. I mean, visually, look at that. But this is Hikaru's idea, to go rook d1 and get some pressure down the d line. But no two ways about it, Magnus is now better. So a6 played, puts a question to the bishop. It now drops back, doesn't take on c6. I mean, in this time, in this variation, you can't be landing a knight there. So Hikaru keeps his bishop pair. And now this is such a Magnus move. So how many people here would be looking to keep the queen on the board? You know, maybe do something with the king, bring another rook to the centre, try and attack this one, stumbling around the centre. But Magnus goes knight e7, swapping the queens, and it's very much in his style just to play positionally, say, okay, I've got the centre, your bishop's a bit locked out, but it was surprising to the commentary team. So king e1 now played, Hikaru getting his running shoes on. Now bishop e6, add some defence to that pawn. We get pawn h3, king f7, and now knight d2 is a great remaneuver from Hikaru. That knight was a bit dead, staring into a pawn wall, and so he's starting to think about this move of pawn to c4. h5 from Magnus, great play, expanding on that king side. Rook a c1 supports the c pawn, knight f5 hits that bishop, it drops back, and here Magnus, he plays a natural looking move, this knight d6. You know, the grandmasters love these octopus centralized knights on the 6th and 3rd ranks, but he was actually better starting with immediately going g5, because now if you go bishop f3, which we see in the game to pressure this pawn, well, you're running into knight h4, pressuring it. There's also g4 ideas immediately, so this was better. Oh, and you keep the d line open to protect this pawn. When the knight comes here and blocks it, well, now there's bishop f3 pressuring. You don't want to go e4, by the way, because after you drop back, you've really weakened this square. And now here, g5, knight b3, and you've got a problem as black, because you want to retreat this bishop, say something like this, but then the pawn drops. So that's why Magnus hops with knight e4, blunts this one, thereby protecting the pawn. But okay, Hikaru can pick up the bishop pair, not ideal. Now he doesn't chop here, by the way. Although you double the pawns, you open the d file, you've given up your bishops, this one's locked out, not a good way to go. So instead, c4, excellent move, breaking open the position and taking advantage of the fact that you can't take or you drop your knight. So coming back here, Magnus finds a great shot now, uses quite some time here, but he pushes on with pawn g4. And it's all about trying to open this h-file to activate the rook. And that's why Hikaru doesn't take here. What does he do? Well, he finds the best response. Takes on d5. Magnus takes here, Hikaru takes with check, king recaptures and now captures on f3 played. So Hikaru is now a pawn up. But after the rook swap, knight g5, Magnus is winning one back by force. But after king e2, knight takes here. This is very risky because pawn f4 comes and it takes away the knight's retreat square. So there's ideas now of simply trapping that knight. Really fascinating, and Magnus gets the wrong pawn structure. He should immediately come with king to f5 here. Technically best to hold that tension between the pawns. But what Magnus does is pawn e4. So yes, this one's locked out, but this one's actually worse. Because after king f1, you now have to go rook g8 to cut the king. And so black is kind of tying down two pieces here, but white's only tying down one. And we see that now with rook c5. Pressures the pawn, pawn f5, and check, and king goes. And you've got this rook now very active, very dangerous. So bishop g3 from Hikaru, looks to check. Rook g4, just in time. Magnus hanging on by a thread here. Rook e8 from Hikaru, looks to activate. And now pawn h4, kicks back this bishop, and Magnus puts the king on the wrong square. He should go to g7 here as his best move, although he wouldn't have wanted to do that. You know, you're running into the check stuff here, and it's still good for white. But here, he goes king g6, and there's a really nice kind of zugzwang move here. You can go rook f8, and black is just completely paralyzed. You know, you can't move the knight, the rook is boxed in. You have to do something like push a pawn, but then b4. What do? You have to go with the king, and this one drops. And once that drops, this is likely to drop soon, and the f-pawn's running, which unleashes the bishop, you know, to go wherever onto a dark square, who knows. Anyway, so that was the way to go, this quiet rook f8. But Hikaru brings the rook to the h-file, we get king g7, the rook swings back, b5, rook b7 check, and king g6 now actually starts to drive this king up the board. Technically, Hikaru should have dropped back, checked that king, because now although he picks up these pawns, look at the black king marching into the position. So we get rook f6, pressuring this one, the king defends, king g2, and now this is just the star move of the game. The whole idea, the concept that Magnus would see this in the time pressure, 10 seconds or so. What do you think he played here? Now it was in the thumbnail, although it was quite a small picture, so you maybe couldn't see it. So the move he plays is knight takes on f2. He's just given a piece for a pawn. Why? Because after the king now marches in and hits this one, it drops back to g1, we get check, the king goes, and he munches another pawn. And how dead is this piece? Yes, it's an extra piece, but it's just so trapped in, and the king is so active along with a running past pawn. Now, you can, bishop f2 was played. Yeah, you can take this pawn here. This was technically possible for Hikaru. Still then king g4 can come, and I guess he was worried about this pawn running and everything. So he starts with bishop f2 first. Now Magnus defends this pawn.
Look at what he's done. The black king has crept into the position. He's going for the win, Magnus, if he can get his king into the f3 square.
We get check and king f3. So the king lands on this absolutely dominant square. And you're threatening to now pick up this bishop. So it takes this pawn, we get check, that would be mate, except for the fact that you can drop back with the bishop, but now this pawn drops. We get rook b6, coming behind this one. The king now goes to f3. You could have taken here, by the way, but Magnus just playing it slowly, keeping the pressure, keeping white boxed in. We get rook h6, pawn e3, check. The king drops back. Again, you could take the pawn, you know, nothing wrong with that, but it does soon drop. You know, we see a few more moves, and now here, the rook attacks the pawn, and Carlsen once again marches in the king. You cannot take, or you're running into check. The king goes, and this is literally leading to a mate. You know, this is just a sample line. So the pawn immune. Instead, Hikaru slides back across. Now Magnus takes on f4, and look how menacing these pawns are, you know, running down the board. Really reminds me, this one actually, of the Duda Carlsen game from the other day. I'll link that video at the end in case you missed it. So Hikaru here just defending like a lion, just like Magnus was, but so much pressure, so low on the clock, it's tough. The rook slides back, Rook b1 now played, we get check, king e4, and now Hikaru, he just blinks. So the best defense here is to come back to the second apparently. Actually, let me just show that one, because if the pawn pushes, well, you check, the king goes, and you can actually pick up this pawn. You're just in time with it all because you're pressuring this rook, and if it moves, well, then you can start checking the king, and okay, there's problems for black in trying to make progress with these pawns and not get checked. But okay, Hikaru goes here, pinning the pawn, but after rook b2, he thinks, okay, I've unleashed my bishop now, it's no longer pinned, I'm going to win this pawn, but there's a problem. King f3, look at that dominating square once again, and you cannot take the pawn. If you do it like that, you drop a bishop, and coming back here, if you take with the bishop, you drop checkmate in one. So Hikaru drops back the bishop, but now this pawn drops, and you've got the same position, but with a b pawn running. Huge problems. We get checked. The king goes, this sequence of moves, and now Hikaru brings the rook behind the pawn, but it's all over. The king starts marching in. Where to go from here? These pawns, they come to the 6th rank now, or 3rd rank rather. We get rook b4, cutting the king, but simply f2, bishop takes, and this was the final position. Hikaru resigned. Why did he resign? Well, you can't stop just checkmate occurring basically. So whose move is it? It's white to move. If you take the pawn, then you simply queen with check. If you don't take the pawn, if you just wait, well then again you check and you make a queen. And if you don't wait with the rook, say you run with the king, well you can queen anyway. Again, you get these kind of lines, you can check and then make the queen, all over. So this was the final reaction from the players. Look at this clip here.
Hikaru offers his hand.
What a painful loss for Nakamura. This is not the way Magnus wanted to win.
No.
And you can just see Hikaru not happy, Magnus doing his kind of smug, well, okay, that's how it goes sometimes thing. Same as we saw when he swindled Richard Rapport in that game, really. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this one. Do subscribe to never miss a future video and see another amazing game between Duda and Carlsen. Check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.